I love eating meat and torturing animals and all the horrible things that vegans commit me to when I say that. So yeah.
Interesting. So what? Yeah. So forget this. Forget the vegans. Forget all that. What is your? Have you thought morally about meat eating, and is it informed, or is it just what you like the taste of?
Basically, vegans start from a point of we ought to value sentient life. I typically start from the point of we ought to value human sentient life. People will ask me why humans versus all sentient life, and I'll say, well, I think the human conscious experience is something unique that we ought to protect, but it's kind of arbitrary because it's very foundational. And they'll say, well, I think we should protect all life, and I'll say, well, why? And they'll go, well, because suffering is bad. And it's like, why is it, but the suffering of what things is bad? It's like, well, why? And you start to ground out in these areas that are like fundamentally unknowable or outside of like human knowledge. Yeah. So that's why I'm a meter. The ethical arguments get like very, very into the weeds on like epistemics and ethics in terms of like how do we figure out exactly, where our foundational belief is here for all of our ethical beliefs. But where I'm at is I'm a meat eater, but I'm a consistent meat eater. Okay. I think that most people on this planet, based on where their ethical intuitions lie, should probably be vegetarians, I think. Usually what I get the most fun out of is anytime like an animal gets like tortured or killed, like Cecil the lion or that the gorilla that got shot when the kid. Yeah. Whenever shit like this happens, I will relentlessly make fun of meat eaters that get super emotionally invested and involved and get like cry or whatever when like between like snarfing down, mouthfuls of chicken nuggets and cheeseburgers of animals that are being factory farmed and stuff. I think it's incredibly hypocritical. If you care about stuff like your dog or your cat and all this, probably you shouldn't be like a meat eater. If it like morally bothers you if people eat like cats or dogs, but you think it's okay to eat cows or pigs or whatever, but yeah, that's a whole other.
Got it. So you mentioned that your ground is human sentience. Is that a reasoned position, or is that just an intuitive moral position where you don't feel a connection to animals?
I think at some point we're gonna have to say that it's intuitive, but I mean, like the rationale, I guess, is that like I feel like human conscious experiences. There's a lot of parts of these that are incredibly unique that only exist insofar as like human experiences go. So like comprehension of language, not just like speaking a word and having a reaction, but like the entire there's an entire cognition that goes into understanding language that like only humans understand. So for instance, like animals can't understand negatives, for instance. Like if I tell you, your mom is not in that room, that has like semantic meaning to you. You understand that. But an animal can't understand a negative, or they can't understand like being able to describe something else in another time or place. They have like more like complicated systems of like Pavlovian responses, essentially, right? Like if I bark, I could tell you there's like danger or food, but I couldn't communicate like complicated information that exists in different time or space and things. Like there's a lot of like parts of our mind, of our conscious sentient experiences that are incredibly elevated compared to animals. So I'll say that like that's probably the reason why I value the human conscious experience a bit differently. But I mean, at the end of the day, that's going to, like I said, well, why would you value that? There's a very common line of vegan argumentation called name the trait, where they'll try to get you to say like, well, what is the one trait a human has that every human has that animals don't have? Yeah. Basically stuff like that. And it gets pretty difficult to go through the weeds, but that's essentially kind of where I wind up. But
got it. And I mean, because that was where I was going to ask was just like someone who, it has a language deficiency or is mentally retarded, which I don't know what we call that nowadays. Like,
not that word.
It's not that. Is maybe that's why people are upset when you use it, because you would eat them. Is how do you answer that? Name that trait. Objection.
Yeah, I never go by traits. I say that like humans are gifted a priori with like the faculty for a type of cognition that doesn't exist even in like apes or gorillas. Like can't like comprehend language, for instance. Some people are going to fight with like Coco the ape or whatever, or the gorilla. Like none of that actually is true. If you go
and let me ask you, like what is it? The contrapositive. Like, what if an ape could? What if we found an ape that like spoke? With that,
yeah, I think at some point, I think you'd have to make a concession. Like if an alien species came and they seem to possess like similar faculty, you have to say like, okay, well, if we're gonna grant humans the right to exist, or whatever, we probably should for these creatures as well, right?
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I disagree with a lot of that, but it sounds like you've had these arguments before, and so we don't need to.
The next question is, how do I feel about abortion?
No.
Those are the two biggest arguments where people come out of my whole audience like, no.
Yeah. No, my sense of you, which you obviously don't agree with, is that you are starting from wanting to eat meat and rationalizing backward for like what are the differences that will grant this, that will also make me, which also seems very important to you, to remain intellectually consistent. And I imagine, I could be wrong, that your experience does probably include a lot of intuitive felt connection to animals, because I think that probably like me, you're connected to what appears to be a spectrum of consciousness that you experience them as having, and like their capacity to suffer moves you. I would guess, though I don't know exactly what goes on in your experience of
Sure, yeah, probably. For most people, right? Like I would say like a person that tortures animals is probably a bad person because there's something missing empathetically there that would make them more likely to hurt humans, right? I think that's I think that's been debunked, but there used to be like the psychopath triad. It was like
they hurt animals and started fires and shit.
Set fires and pee the bed. I think.
Pee the bed? I didn't know that one.
Yeah, I think that was the psychopath triad, but I think that's been largely disproven. But I mean, if I saw somebody like torturing an animal, I would think this person's fucked in the head. So yeah. Yeah.
Would you? Well, then we can wrap on this. Would you feel compassion for the animal? Like, let's assume that person never harms a human ever. Like, they just get off on horses, cows, pigs, dogs, cats.
I mean, I think you would, but I mean, like, would I? I think I probably would. Yeah, because there's intuitive. It's not an intuition pump. There are things that are gonna ring true for everybody. Like hearing something cry out. It sounds like a baby. It sounds like a cry. Seeing something trying to escape from a negative stimulus. Like these are all going to be things that's like you feel that, right? Even like a robot doing these things, you'd probably have like an empathetic response for it, right? Yeah.
Sure. Or GTA 5, person on the street when you run him over, you're like, oh God.